Alright, we got one more build video for Remnant from Hell mod to do before the Remnant 2 DLC drops. But I've been playing some Roboquest, so I'll probably do a video on that later too. But for now, more Remnant 1. And in this video, we're going to be discussing two more builds in the From Hell mod that utilize some new and unique items. Both of these are going to be mod power focused, but in some slightly different ways. But anyway, let's just get into these builds. So the first build here is about as cookie cutter mod spam as you'll probably get. This is the Dragon Breath build. Now again, it is simple, but as you can see, it's going to be extremely effective. This mod power build is built entirely around the Dragon's Breath mod, which is new here in the From Hell mod. I just said mod a lot. And we're going to be utilizing this to its full potential. So to start though, we have a slight recap as to why Dragon's Breath and why specifically we have to pair it with the shotgun. So remember that Remnant has this feature with shotguns where if you shoot a mod that's a weapon fire mod, after you run out of that, you're going to gain an increased rate of fire equal to the mod's rate of fire for a short period of time as it switches over from the mod to standard shooting. This is a feature in both Remnant 1 and Remnant 2. So this interaction won't work if we use something like Throwing Knives or Breath of the Desert, which do similar damage, but these are caster mods and actually don't use the weapon to fire. As a result, we pair the shotgun with Dragon's Breath specifically so we can empty our Dragon's Breath and then quickly swap to shotgun's normal shooting and get 2 extra shots in really fast, which are going to generate you a ton of mod power, because as it also turns out, the shotgun generates some of, if not the most mod power per shot, as it's going to be based on your weapon's base damage. So this entire setup is extremely deliberate. Of course, since we're focusing on mod power and spam, we also have to use a very specific set of gear for this build. And obviously that means we're going to be running Labyrinth Armor for that fat 50% mod damage and 10% refund. But like the super slow-mo build, we're going to be using Burden of the Follower and the Evoker Seal to generate just dumb levels of mod power. While Burden of the Follower reduces our fire rate by 35%, we actually don't even notice this during the whole mod to shotgun fire switch that gives us our increased rate of fire, as it's not actually affecting our mod fire rate either. So again, we're probably not even going to notice it at all unless we're just using our shotgun to generate some more mod power on the side. So the last piece of mandatory gear here is the neck. This is the charcoal necklace, which did get reworked here in the From Hell mod, and it's a very interesting neck now. So what it does is that it allows you to get 6 stacks of fire dots on an enemy. And if you cross that threshold, your fire dots get consumed and then explode for a chunk of damage. So you can build this in 2 different ways. You can either land on 6 fire stacks and use it as a dot necklace and just, run with 6 stacks of fire, because that's nothing to scoff at. Or you can go for crossing the threshold as much as possible and then use it to nuke with fire explosions. And yeah, that's what we're going to be doing. And it just so happens that Dragon Breath shoots 7 pellets, all of which can apply a stack of fire ignite. So if you happen to land all your shots, you immediately get a big explosion, and that's the goal of the build. Just lots of fire explosions with lots of fire shots. And so the last pieces of gear here that we have available are the handgun and the melee weapon. Now, while you're free to use anything here in these slots, I have gone with the Hive Cannon for the most part, as corrosive is going to help all of our damage quite a lot, and it's not something we're going to have an issue with sustaining, as we pretty much always have Hive shots available because of our mod generation. Your melee weapon is dealer's choice. It's really just there for emergencies. Use whatever you want. Of course, Smolder would be good thematically. You can use other handguns such as Aegis for damage reduction, or some other weapon with Icy Mist or Spore Shot for slows. Pretty much anything you want will work, but again, I think Hive Cannon is just too good to pass up, just because it's got a lot of extra utility with the whole, AoE hits and stuff. So again, I have to reiterate, this whole Dragon's Breath build is extremely simple and it's easy to play. You just have to drop a Hive shot and then spam Dragon's Breath to your heart's content. Though you will have some issues with visual clarity though, as the explosion is quite large and does fill the screen with a lot of smoke, so there will definitely be a lot of times where enemies are attacking you and you're not going to see them due to your consistent spamming of fireballs, smoke, and brimstone. But if you can weather the firestorm, you're going to come out with one of the strongest builds available in the From Hell mod, at least that's in my opinion. It's pretty nutty. That being said, there still are plenty of modifiers that kind of mess up this build's entire functionality, if you happen to be running my extra fixes mod. Things like Silence, Elemental Resistance, and even Jammer kind of really dampen our damage output to a point where you might even want to change your build in these situations. Though I did a few bosses with Elemental Resistance and Jammer and it wasn't too bad. And so this is the Dragon's Breath build. It's going to be right up there with Super Slow Mo for me as my favorite builds to run the From Hell mod, because I love dots and I love mod damage and I like shotguns, and so it's everything I like in a build. But with that out of the way, I do want to discuss the next build, which is our Rolling Thunder setup. So our Rolling Thunder is a shock-based build that's kind of built on a lot of different weird pieces. Like, the set doesn't really look like it makes any sense on paper. But let's go ahead and start with the weapons, which are the core of this build. The Jolt Rifle. This is a new long gun that's just all around kind of unique. So what this weapon does is it shoots a lightning bolt at the target for moderate shock damage. It's got a clip size 1, average reload speed, good projectile speed, kind of whatever. But where this gun gets crazy is the mod, Supercharge. This mod is and isn't a mod. It's always active, it requires no mod power, and passively it lets your bolts apply a stack of conductive status that increases shock damage taken by about 10% per stack, and it stacks up to 5 times, and it lasts 10 seconds. Then you can actually push the mod activation to detonate all the arrows that are stuck in the target for 1.5 times their base range damage in shock damage, which of course is going to be amplified by the stacks of conductive on the target. So yeah, there's a lot going on, but in the end this is a weapon with a range damage scaling mod, which also scales with shock damage, and it's a mod that's always active, but then you can also push to activate again. Now, you can build around this with something like Slayer armor, Hunter armor, or even Bandit armor to dump a bunch of arrows into the target, but I found a different use for this. Now, it's most likely a bug, but because the mod is always active, what happens is that it turns out any of your shock damage applies conductive, not just from the bolts from Jolt Rifle. So something like the Curse of the Jungle pistol will also apply conductive on each shot, which is pretty cool. But it just so happens that we also recently got Shock Shot, basically overflow from Remnant 2. And this gives us a chance on hit to apply overload, and that also applies conductive on hit because we're now doing shock damage. So we can use pretty much our handgun as our only weapon of choice with Shock Shot and then get the benefit of the Jolt Rifle at the same time. Now, if and when this interaction gets fixed, it's not going to be that big of a deal because I'll just change the armor set to Bandit, so we can just keep that on the back burner for now. But again, we're going to abuse this and make the Rolling Thunder build. So with an SMG paired with Shock Shot, we can dump a ton of rounds into the target and fish for overload procs, and then of course while we're detonating them with the SMG. I use the SMG instead of the machine pistol just due to the clip sizes, but the machine pistol is a viable alternative. But these two weapons are the entire core of the Rolling Thunder build, and the results are electric. Now, to bolster this whole setup, we do have a few options. Now, contrary to what you might think, we don't actually need to scale mod power for this build. You can, and I do, but for a different reason, which I'll get to in a second. Something like Void Armor, Bandit Armor, which we mentioned, or even Radiant for momentum is all awesome. Radiant's probably the best choice to be honest, but I'm using Labyrinth because of the mod generation passive and for a little extra damage, and we'll touch on more of that in a second. For the trinkets, we're going to be using Vulcan's Detonator. Off choice, I know, why not Storm Amulet, right? Well, basically because most of our damage is going to be coming from the overload procs, and these are explosive damage. So we can get the same damage output with Vulcan's Detonator as with the Storm Amulet, but then we also get the Fire Dot on top of that, and we need that dot because it generates mod power. And then for the rings, we're going to be using Burden of the Follower from the mod generation, because this build does absolutely no damage once he runs out of Shock Shot, so we want to get that back up as quickly as possible. So we're pairing the Labyrinth Armor's 10% refund with Burden of the Follower to try to get right back into Shock Shot. And then the last ring we're going to be using is Burden of the Gambler, because overloads can't do weak spot damage anyway, and this will get us some extra DPS with the crit explosions from overload. While we do lose a good chunk of our fire rate due to the Burden of the Follower, I find that mod generation is worth it in the end. But you're also free to run the Radiant Armor set for 30% more crit and crit damage thanks to momentum, and then use something like Spirit Stone for 25% mod generation and 10% mod damage on top, and Burden of the Gambler, and then you're going to be doing some big ass crits consistently. And in the end, the Radiant setup does about the same damage as the Labyrinth per overload explosion, but has significantly faster fire rate and a higher crit chance. I just prefer the medium roll speeds for Labyrinth and not having to worry about maintaining momentum, but honestly either set works out great. Alright, so the Rolling Thunder build just crushes all ad clear and trash and elite mobs, not just due to SMG's overload capabilities, but also because the Jolt Rifle itself is actually very good for picking off enemies from afar before they even aggro onto you, thanks to it being a silent weapon because it's basically a crossbow, and the mod also being spammable and costing no mod power, so you can just keep it up constantly. So all you have to do is just shoot an enemy from way out far and then detonate it, and the bolt causes it to explode and it'll probably die, or if it doesn't, then the fire dot that follows is going to kill it. For bossing, while the DPS isn't amazing, it's still pretty good. It just feels awesome to play with, just constantly getting those detonates on the overload. It's great, because we really never had a great shock setup in Remnant 1. Mod Swapper with like Eye of the Storm is cool, but this is on a whole nother level, and it definitely keeps my ADD in check. And again, I'm highly recommending this build to give it a try, just because it's super fun. It may not be the most optimal thing around, but I love it. And it may get patched later, so use it while you can. But again, even if it does, that's not going to kill the build. It'll just make us use the Jolt Rifle at the start of a fight to get the debuff on the enemies, and then we'll just go right back into, running Shock Shot. But anyway, that's going to be all for me. So thank you all for watching, and thanks to my Patreon members. I always appreciate you all. If anyone wants to talk shop about Remnant or gaming in general, feel free to join my Discord in the description below. But yeah, stay tuned for Remnant 2 DLC videos with all the ritualist nonsense. So yeah, peace and good luck out there, hunters.